So, yes, as I said, or as I have been introduced, thanks for the introduction, Simon. I'm Linus from the University of Freiburg, and I'm a computer scientist. And this paper we've done in a joint work with people also from philosophy or ethics and economics and law. And so let's jump right in and ask what is our motivation. So as you are probably all aware, it's very difficult nowadays to go anywhere where you are not confronted with being caught on video surveillance. For example, those two pictures here I just took yesterday on my walk from the hotel to this place. And yeah, so apparently there's a technology that kind of interferes with your intimacy in a way, because yeah, images of yourself are being taken. And there's apparently also a coercion, because I cannot really choose. That's why I put a question mark here for choice. So if I want to move in public places, I am caught on video apparently, and I do not know who is taking, or at least I might know who is taking that, but I don't know where is it stored, what can maybe later be done with that video. So yeah, I might feel a little bit limited in my freedom. Ironically, on that it says freedom in the corner. So yeah, but then you might also ask, well, is it really a problem? And if you look at polls that are taken, for example, this one was taken last year in Germany regarding surveillance, and people were asked, are you worried that you are personally affected? And it's not so many people that, I mean, at least it's 1/4, but most people say, well, I have nothing to hide, and if it's good to stop terrorist attacks and catch the bad guys, then I'm fine with being surveilled all the time. I kind of question that attitude, and I'm wondering whether those people might maybe not have thought all the way through, but there are at least 1/4 of people who have a problem with that surveillance that is becoming more and more. And these are the people that we are also addressing here, and as you can see by those campaigns that we have, particularly in Germany, there are even demonstrations where they say things like privacy is not a crime, or they claim that this is actually the Home Secretary of Germany, the former one, and they claim that he's becoming something like the Stasi 2.0. The Stasi was in the DDR, of course, an institution that was very heavily spying on their citizens and so on. So in Germany, we are particularly sensitive to stuff like that, because we've had the Nazis, and then afterwards we had the Stasi in the DDR. So whenever there's an overmighty state that is doing surveillance stuff, we are maybe even more sensitive than it might be in other countries. So yeah, there are arguments like, you may have nothing to hide, but does that guarantee that you have nothing to fear? Or also hundreds of millions of suspects to boost the rate of solved crimes by 0.006%. So I think these are justified concerns, and if there's maybe even a growing number of people who feel like not really comfortable in the democracy anymore because of such developments, then I think that this is something that we should try to do something about. So the ideal actually would be to somehow protect the privacy of the many, many good guys which are there. So there's actually no need to survey them all the time and record their data. And this is something here that an artist group in Austria, Social Impact, they did this to raise the awareness of how difficult it actually is to move in public spaces without being caught on camera, by organizing guided city tours where the people were all dressed the same, and they got those shields to shield themselves from the cameras which were all over the place. And so the city guide would tell them, okay, now there's a camera coming up, so hide behind your shields, and then there's the next camera, and so on. So they wanted to raise the awareness. But wouldn't it be great if you would not have to carry a shield like that, but if you would be just automatically, by the surveillance technology itself, be shielded, as long as you are, of course, a good guy and not doing something bad, like, for example, this guy here, pushing a woman in front of an arriving train. Fortunately, nothing really bad happened in that case. But if something like that, of course, happens, everybody would agree it is afterwards a benefit if you can go back to the video footage and identify that person, and then prosecute him better than you would have been able if there was no surveillance. So yeah, is it maybe possible to combine the two? So the idea would actually be look something like that the camera would somehow blank out all the people who are not doing anything wrong, but the people who are doing something wrong, they will be able to be recognized or de-anonymized later in the video. And this is an idea that has been around for some time, so I have to give credit also to the researchers who have done research in that area before, and you find the references in the paper also. But what we did in this paper on top of that is that we actually looked at it at a multidisciplinary approach. So we did not only look at the technology from the computer science point of view, but we had also ethics, economics, and law having their approach on it. And I'm now going through the different fields, starting with my own field, computer science, then moving on to the other fields where I'm a little bit out of my comfort zone, so you have to excuse me if I'm maybe simplifying things a little bit, and also if I maybe not be able to answer all the questions in all detail regarding the other fields, but at least I'm trying to reproduce what I have been taught by my colleagues about their particular field of expertise. So starting with the computer science, that's how such an anonymization system could work. Here we have the recorded persons, and they are caught by a camera, as it is today. But now, within that camera is a chip, a circuitry, the digital cloak of invisibility, the DCI circuit, and this does the following. First of all, there's the recorded plain data. Then there comes an image recognition algorithm that recognizes all the areas in which there are people. And then, with a cryptographic secret key that is really stored secretly in that camera, so it's not possible, or at least it would be very, very expensive to make an attack and extract that secret key from the camera, so that's considered to be secret. From that secret key, then, there is a hash function that creates for each frame and each region an individual subkey. And from that subkey, a pseudo-random pattern is generated that could be then XORed, which is a mathematical function that is actually reversible, with the plain data, and thereby the plain data is anonymized. And now what the camera is giving as an output is only the anonymized data. So whenever a crime fighter looks at the video for real-time surveillance, or when the data is stored for later, you only have the anonymized data. And now, what happens if actually something bad happens and you want, in hindsight, to identify who it was? Then this works as follows. The crime fighter knows that, okay, something happened at that time and that time, like, for example, somebody has been pushed in front of a train, and you know that this box pushed the other box in front of the train. And now you say, okay, frame 2, frame 3, I want the region 2 and 3 on both of these frames to be de-anonymized. Then you go to something that we call a trusted key keeper authority, so that's like a third party which must be somehow democratically elected, or at least trusted. It could be a judge. So actually the request from the crime fighter to de-anonymize people here could be like the equivalent of a search warrant, because the police is also not allowed to just go into your flat without first having a search warrant. And in a similar way also, the police would have to ask a judge, are we allowed to de-anonymize people on that video footage? And only when the keykeeper authority says, okay, this is a justified claim, a justified request, then they own also the equivalent to the camera master keys from the camera. Then they can create from that the subkeys, but only the subkeys needed for those particular regions, and thus only what has been requested can be de-anonymized, while all the other data and all the other footage of the other persons still remains anonymous. Right, so that's how in a technical implementation could work for that. I also, in the end, I will show you the little prototype that we already did, but now I will tell you what the other disciplines have to say about that. But first, this would be what the mockup example would look like. First, you have the anonymized data, and even on the anonymized data, so these would not only be boxes, but actually the silhouettes of the people. Even here, you could see that something bad is happening, somebody is pushing somebody else, somebody's lying on the floor. So this would even work for real-time monitoring. Real-time monitoring would also not be hampered really by such a technology. And then afterwards, of course, if you want to see, okay, who was it? Who do we have to persecute? Then you go and request to de-anonymize that particular person here, but the others would still be protected. And what does the law, at least for the German jurisdiction, have to say to that? Well, it's very, of course, abbreviated, but in general, you can say video surveillance by law is legitimate if it is sufficient and necessary. And sufficiency means that the intended purpose is fulfilled. And what are the intended purposes of video surveillance? Well, you can say it's real-time monitoring, it's the hindsight detection, and deterrence. And as these are all given by video surveillance, sufficiency is, for classical video surveillance, is always given, so it's in that perspective legitimate. And necessity is given when there's no other mean that fulfills the purpose in a less severe way, so in a way that would be less interfering with the privacy of the people recorded, and that is economically reasonable. So video surveillance can always be justified by saying, well, putting a person there surveilling the platform of the station would be much more expensive, so it's not economically reasonable. Therefore, video surveillance is in this place legitimate. So that's also why for the lawyers, there's not really a problem with current video surveillance because it's legitimate by the laws. But now let's compare the classical video surveillance with the DCI video surveillance, and there we can say that still the sufficiency is given because you can do real-time monitoring, as I've just shown on the previous slide. You can do hindsight detection, and given that the people know how the technology works, and given that they know that they can be de-anonymized afterwards, also the deterrence effect would still be there for the DCI. And when we look at the necessity, it becomes really interesting because the DCI is even less severe as the classical VS, and if it's, of course, not too expensive to do all the implementation and the keykeeper authority and all that, it would still be economically reasonable, and that would all of a sudden render the classical VS not the least severe mean, which could even mean that that classical CV could be illegal and the DCI cameras would be legally compulsory to be used instead. Right. So the law is mostly looking at what is there and so on, but the ethics actually, they try to be a little bit ahead of the law as far as I understood it so far. And so the ethics help us first of all to bring the concerns about video surveillance into metaphors that make it easier to actually understand what do we mean by privacy and by data protection and so on. And there are two perspectives you could take. One is the individual-centric perspective, and there are two metaphors. One would be the metaphor of a transparent citizen, meaning that the state somehow, or whoever is doing the surveillance, knows everything about you. They know when you leave your house, they know when you go to work, they will realize when you are sick, they know when you are on vacation and so on. So you have become somehow transparent, which is something that many people might not be really comfortable with, especially if you do not know who's the one on the other side looking through you. And the other metaphor is the one of the generalized suspicion. So the meaning that when we survey everybody, it means it could be interpreted like we suspect everybody to be a potential criminal, which is also something that might not be considered right. Why is the state just per se mistrusting me? I've never done anything wrong. And then when we look at the other perspective, which would be the societal-centric perspective, then there's the metaphor of an Orwellian surveillance society, which I suppose you're all aware of, like this Big Brother is watching you from 1984, meaning that when we have surveillance everywhere, then we are inclined to somehow adjust our behavior to be more conform. So the openness and the individuality, which actually we value as a virtue of our society, becomes really limited. And the other metaphor would be a Kafkaesque surveillance society. That's referring to the trial by Kafka in which the protagonist is actually accused of something, but neither he knows really what he's done, nor do the people who accuse him really tell him, or maybe they don't even know themselves what he has done wrong. And this is something that could, of course, also happen in such a surveillance society, particularly in a surveillance society which is aided by computer algorithms that might single out somebody and say, well, check this guy out. And it's not really possible to trace back anymore why you have to check him just because some algorithm came up with that he has done something suspicious. So whenever you are checked at the airport or whatever, you don't even have a real mean to go against whatever illegitimate consequence you might suffer. And when we now compare also classical VS with the DCI, we can again tick off all those metaphors and say that for the transparent citizens, the tracking is hampered, so that is an improvement there. Generalized suspicion is also not there anymore as much because the anonymization is individual and only with probable cause. The Orwellian surveillance society is not so much there anymore because by default nobody is surveilled. And the Kafka surveillance society also is not as bad anymore because the anonymization of the stored data actually also protects against data misuse and the so-called bycatch that you might just get afterwards. So we can conclude that the DCI effectively mitigates individual and societal ethical risks. And now finally, what the economics have to say to such a technology. Generally, in economic scenarios, it's a little bit different than in the public sector because when the video surveillance is indicated, for example, in a shop, then it's mostly not so much a legal problem because you still can decide if you want to enter that shop or if you don't want to enter the shop. So by entering the shop, you are pretty much consenting to being filmed. So the law is not as strict there as it is when the state is actually doing the surveillance. However, it would be possible that a store advertises with privacy-aware video surveillance. For example, like Superstore, we respect your privacy, and then if you read more carefully, you can find out that unless you shoplift or take part in our Blue Badge loyalty program, this is yet another interesting application. Because I don't know if you are aware, in the USA, it's already quite common that the shops are really tracking where you go and what aisle you are standing in and what advertisement you have looked at the most and so on. And then when you check out at the counter with your loyalty card, you get customized offers sent to your home based on where you have stood and where you have looked. So things like that already happen. But now with such a DCI camera, actually people could opt into taking part in such things and say, well, okay, I'm fine with being tracked. So if I get some discounts and special offers, I'm fine. So maybe I put this badge on my jacket and the camera will detect it and thereby I will be not anonymized, or I will not put it on and then I will be anonymized, and that gives the image of the digital cloak of invisibility yet its real meaning, because then you can actually decide when to put the cloak on or when you don't want to put it on. And the prototype we did was quite similar, but a little bit also the opposite, because instead of an opt-in solution, we did it first in an opt-out way because we wanted to abstract from the image recognition at first. So when you want to be anonymized, you have to wear, in this case, an infrared beacon. And when the camera detects the infrared beacon, it puts an anonymization box around you. So the cryptography and all that is already working here. The only thing that is still not working is the image recognition, that actually the shape is recognized and so on, and that it is by default anonymizing everybody, and that you can opt out by wearing a badge, for example. Right, so the conclusion and the outlook would be that, as I said, the DCI is a less severe, economically reasonable alternative to classical video surveillance, which, if implemented appropriately, could even mean that it is legally compulsory. And for the future, we have planned, first of all, to develop a fully fledged prototype so that not only a box is put there and you can opt out, but that you actually can have to opt in if you do not if you consent to not being anonymized, and that the shapes are recognized and all of that. And then we are hoping to do a field study next year. We are already now in touch with the city of Freiburg and police, and they are initially at least quite interested in what we have told them so far. So I hope this will work in that direction. And then, of course, our questions are: is it practical for law enforcement? Who should actually act as this keykeeper authority in different scenarios? For example, in a supermarket, the keykeeper authority might just be somebody elected and not necessarily a judge. And then, can it successfully be conveyed to the public? Will the people trust the algorithms and hardware? So if you see a camera which claims, well, yeah, I'm a DCI camera here, look, everybody's anonymized, will the people actually believe it, or will they not be suspicious and say, yes, you can tell me everything, but in reality there's a backdoor or whatever? So is it possible to make that hardware really trustworthy, which is actually my field of expertise, hardware trust and security? Right, that's all I wanted to tell you. Thanks for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a fascinating one. As we discussed last night, I done some work in the back end of this stuff about a decade ago. One comment and one question. One comment: one of the things that is a benefit of this that I think you haven't mentioned is the increasing cost involved in doing the investigation is one of the key elements about preventing overuse of this. It's preventing use of this for trivial purposes. And that's something that we talk about in the economics law area for things like having to get a warrant for doing searches. It means that there's a cost to each individual search, and therefore that reduces their tendency to overuse their powers, just the fact that they've got to go through that. So that's a benefit I think you could add in to the claims here. The second question I've got is, it would be interesting, and I'm not sure, and this is, feel free to say you'd have to think about this, would it be possible to add in an element to the cryptographic encoding that would allow the keykeeper to deliberately get rid of things on a known timescale, so that you could say you have to ask for this within 7 days or 28 days or 42 days or whatever it is. And the keykeeper, you have to trust the keykeeper anyway, but the keykeeper would delete the keys so that you couldn't keep going back and back, but you kept it for a reasonable length of time, and that reasonable length of time would differ depending on the application.
Yeah, very interesting. Yes, I mean, of course, nowadays we already have those laws which dictate that the video is always supposed to be kept for a certain amount of time, and I would suggest that even when you have the DCI video surveillance, still the same would have to apply. So even the anonymized data would have to be deleted after some time. But it's an interesting take, actually, to enforce this even on the other side by somehow having a key rotation system or something like that. Because you're right, there's only one camera master key, and if that gets corrupted, then all the data is accessible. So it would be interesting. I'm at the moment, I cannot really think of a cryptographic scheme that allows such change of keys on a regular basis, but I definitely try to look into that. Yeah, I suppose so. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your interesting talk. I totally agree with you, and I like the idea of reducing the ethical concerns and the security risks. But I would like to take the view of the police for a moment, and I got two questions. If the police cannot see everyone, isn't there the risk they oversee something? Your case was very obvious. There was one person and another person, so two persons only interacting. But what if there's a third person that might have had a gun that was in the background, and you would see it on the video, but you cannot see it because you only see the shape? And the second question is, there are so many discussions that the police has to be more efficient, it has to go faster, it takes all too long. But if you need a third party that says it's okay that you retrieve the data, that you can see this person or that person, isn't there like some societal thought issue that we should think of when installing such systems?
Yeah, I'm glad that this question came up, which allows me to use my backup slide.
You're welcome.
Yeah, don't tell anybody that we discussed this before. Yeah. No, but yeah, it's a question that commonly comes up, of course, and that's something where you could think of something like a break glass functionality, allowing the police, because of course the scenario can happen. Like, let's say there's somebody shooting around with a gun and then he's gone, and now you want at least to know, well, was he wearing a red or a yellow jacket, and you don't want to go through all that process because that person is still running around somewhere in the city, and so you have to access the data immediately. This is really something that I'm also intending to ask the police, like, what are your actual scenarios? How often do you actually need the data at once? But yeah, for such a case, you could then imagine that there's a break glass, like there could be a digital break glass, for example. So the police can just say, we need everything de-anonymized right now, and then the subkeys get output, and everything is de-anonymized. But at the same time, a log file and an alert is sent to the keykeeper authority. So in hindsight, you could say, well, was it really justified that they used the break glass, or was it not? And even if you say, well, this is still too much depending on the computer work, it can be sabotaged or whatever, then you could even think of a physical break glass, so the camera master key is just sitting there in a little glass box on a USB stick, so you can just take it out in a real case of emergency. But afterwards, you have to explain why this was really necessary. So that's something that we are thinking about already. And your first point was...
that you might miss information.
Yeah, that's also true. Yeah, I mean, then it completely depends. I mean, if the police say, well, we still don't know enough, or we have to maybe de-anonymize other people because we're looking for testimony and stuff like that, then I guess the keykeeper authority could say, well, it's also a legal request now to de-anonymize everybody that was in that picture. But of course, the so-called bycatch, things you just see randomly, that will definitely be hampered in a way. And yeah, I'm excited to see what the police actually say to that. And yeah, maybe it's also not applicable for all scenarios. Maybe in certain areas it's not good, but in others it is. But yeah, I'm on that.
Oh, thank you. I was thinking about I'm coming from a social science background, and the reconfiguring of moving around in public spaces. How is it actually going to have an effect on us? How is it going to have an effect on us as human beings? Like, I was thinking, are we going to delegate more responsibility to technology? Oh, I see something at the station, but I'm not going to have any actions because everything is going to be taken up by the camera. And so the more we have surveillance and the more we have sophisticated configurings of these technologies, are we going to be less responsible as fellow humans towards each other? And then going to go and say, hey, stop, you cannot touch or hit people or something like that. But are we just going to... Because it's it's not just a standalone, and I can see you have a big focus on technology and the development. You have different disciplines on it. But what I was also missing a little bit was also the social aspect of being a human being in society and actually moving around other people and having responsibility for us.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely something that has to be regarded. But I think it's something that needs to be discussed with the video surveillance we have already now, right? Because what you are saying that is just generally applicable to video surveillance in general, and yeah, I agree.
Something about
Yeah.
technology.
Yeah.
Because sometimes if I get to a metro station and start, then I actually do go to the camera and I stand, so I know there's a camera.
Mhm.
So somebody's sitting somewhere in Copenhagen,
Yeah.
hopefully.
Well,
Yeah.
it might,
You hope so.
You might be the only one who does that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move
Yeah,
on to
okay.
the question.
One simple question. You have been concentrating on sort of crime detection here. But if we take the other type of use case for surveillance cameras, if you're a missing person and the authorities or whoever needs to track you, where were you last seen? How could you get that type of information through this?
Then you will have to de-anonymize everybody.
Yes,
It's
I was hoping for something like
Yeah, I mean,
facial recognition behind.
yes, I mean,
yeah.
you're totally right. This is always happening already. Most of the research that has been done for privacy-aware video surveillance is actually more about have the algorithm detect everything automatically, like have the algorithm recognize if there's a riot about to begin, or have the algorithm recognize when somebody's leaving their baggage unattended, so that there's not actually a person involved anymore, and thereby the privacy is secured because only an algorithm is now surveilling and not your neighbor or whoever is working for the surveillance company is doing the surveillance. So that's for sure a thing that is happening, but our approach is really only very simple in comparison, because we say, yeah, we just do it like we do it now, only we blank everybody out, but still this would not necessarily make it impossible to run all those other algorithms still. I mean, if you would provide the facial recognition machinery with the camera master key, then it could still do everything. Yeah, but it's an interesting point. You just have to be a little bit careful where this camera master key is circulating, otherwise the whole thing is, again, useless.
That's interesting. Biometric identification, but controlled by your cryptography. That's interesting. Fascinating piece of innovative thinking now on surveillance. We should all be aware that we have been surveilled right through the conference, and it's now all on YouTube. So I only wish we had that earlier on. Okay. Thanks very much. That's brilliant.
Yeah, thank you.